Welcome to Latropeth language tutorial number 15, coordinate and subordinate clauses. So let's just have a refresher on the difference between a clause and a sentence. So a clause, you have the car is red, that is also a sentence, but you can have a complex sentence with two or more clauses. The man left after the food arrived. So you have the man left, you have the food arrived, and the two are joined together. Two clauses in one sentence. The man left after the food arrived. Clauses are connected with a conjunction. So when we look at the man left after the food arrived, the conjunction is after, and it says something about the relationship between the two clauses. In this case, a time relationship. Now let's have a look at the relationship of clauses in a sentence to each other. So we're going to look at coordinate versus subordinate clauses and the difference between the two. Coordinate clauses. Two clauses that are freestanding and are connected together in a sentence with a coordinating conjunction. So some examples from English of coordinate clauses. The king left and the queen arrived. Either they took the car or they took public transport. Both of the clauses in each of the respective sentences have equal weight, and they're connected with a conjunction in what are known as a coordinate clause relationship. They're connected together with a coordinating conjunction. So in English, this is in English, of course, examples and, or, those are coordinating conjunctions. Now let's have a look at subordinate clauses. So a main clause is connected to a subordinate clause in a sentence with a subordinating conjunction. The subordinate clause adds adverbial information to the main clause. That's the key point. So let's have a look at the subordinate clause examples in English. Okay, the king left because the queen arrived. They took the car before the party began. So the subordinate clause in the first sentence, the queen arrived, introduced with the subordinating conjunction because the queen arrived. The whole thing operates to give you more information about the main proposition or the main clause, the king left. Information about the reason why the king left. Therefore, the whole second part of it, because the queen arrived, operates like an adverb to the main clause. That's the reason why it's referred to as subordinate, because it's grammatically subordinate, because the whole thing is like an adverb. Look at the second one. They took the car before the party began. The subordinate clause, that's the second clause, and the subordinating conjunction before the party began, that operates to add extra information to the main proposition or main clause. They took the car, and it's information about time. You could say they took the car yesterday, and in that sentence, yesterday would be considered an adverb. It'd be adding information about time to they took the car. In this case, the entire clause before the party began is adding information about time to they took the car. It's telling you when they took the car before the party began. So before the party began is operating like an adverb to they took the car. That is why it's subordinate. So let's look at some English subordinating conjunctions. So because, causal, talks about a causal relationship between the two clauses. Before, after, temporal relationship between the two clauses. Temporal means time, a time relationship. Although, what's referred to as a concessive relationship between the two clauses. Before I go into how we express these coordinate and subordinate relationships in Latropeth between clauses, the thing I like about this aspect of syntax is it seems to reflect something about the way human beings process the world, about the way human beings think. Conceptual boxes of meaning, like the king left, the queen arrived, they conceive of a relationship between the two boxes. It could be a causal relationship, it could be a time relationship, and it's sort of getting at that sort of logic or syntax that says something about the way human beings process the world. So it's very interesting. Okay, coordinate and subordinate clauses in Latropeth. These are formed by juxtaposing, putting together the two associated clauses and adding a clause, relational adverb, within the relevant clause rather than a conjunction between them. So the way it operates is a little bit different. In Latropeth, you use clause relational adverbs. In English, you use conjunctions. So let's just look at how they work. So clause relational adverbs expressing coordination. So in English, you've got your coordinating conjunctions and or. In Latropeth, you have the equivalent coordinating clause relational adverbs. Tisum corresponds to and, apumku corresponds to or. Why are they different categories of speech? Well, let's have a look. With an example sentence. Probably the main thing to point out is a conjunction would generally appear between the two clauses to connect them together with some kind of information about their relationship to each other. The clause relational adverbs in Latropeth are similar, but they appear in the position of an adverb in the respective clause rather than between the two clauses. Okay, so let's have a look at a complex sentence in Latropeth here. These two clauses in the sentence have a coordinate relationship. They both have equal weight, and essentially you're saying something like and. So, pi tenio yis nakum nia punim nasu, pi tenio yis tisum tui buarnahes. You could just put the two clauses together and make them separate sentences. Just by having them adjacent to each other pretty much has the same effect, more or less. The man goes to the river. The woman goes away. By sticking tisum as an adverb, clause relational adverb in the second clause, you're sort of adding the concept of and between the two clauses and building it into a complex sentence. The man goes to the river and the woman goes away. So now let's look at a slightly different sentence. This time we're using the equivalent of or, apumku, but this is a clause relational adverb in Latropeth. Pi teneo yis nakum ni apunim nasu, pi teneo yis apumku ni lua paladasu. Okay, so the man goes to the river or the woman goes into the forest. So there's a sort of mutually exclusive meaning conveyed there, one or the other. Now let's look at the clause relational adverbs expressing subordination in Latropeth. Specifically, let's begin with a causal relationship between the two clauses. So in English, you've got the conjunction because. In Latropeth, you've got the clause relational adverb equivalent of nijo taju. So what do we have here? Na ayosis noyim naya tabu yis nijo taju nijo wa ele. I hope you remember that the X stands for a glottal stop. And also, when you're using an adjective in the predicate of the sentence, it operates more like a verb, and you could think of it as what's known as a stative verb. So, na ayosis noyim. So, the deer is sick. Now look at the next clause, which actually has the causal information, and this is the subordinate clause. Okay, na ya tabu yis nijo taju nijo wa ele. Okay, because it drank bad water, bitter or spoilt water. So the deer is unwell because it drank bitter or spoilt water. You may notice that I fleet between the present and past tense when I'm translating these. It's more the context in these sentences that's telling you what the tense is, whether it's present or past. It could be either one. Now let's look at clause relational adverbs expressing subordination, but let's look at a concessive relationship. So the example in English of the concessive subordinating conjunction is although. Latropeth has the clause relational adverb mai kaya. Okay, let's look at the Latropeth sentence. Na mawa yosis. This has got mau, that's negation. Deer is not sick. Na mawa yosis noyim. Naya tawo yis mawikaya niwa ele. So mawikaya is the clause relational adverb expressing the concessive relationship and essentially means although. Okay, so the deer is not sick, although it drank bad water. Now let's look at conditional relationships. So in English, you've got your conjunction if. Latropeth approaches this with clause relational paired adverbs. Essentially, there is also a contracted single adverb version, which is the last one there, kawosu. So you've got pewa kawi, pewa osu, and kuwosu. Let's have a look at these a bit more closely and as to what I actually mean when I say this. So what generally happens is you have pewa kawi in the conditioning clause. That's sort of equivalent to if. And again, it's operating like an adverb in Latropeth, in the same sort of place you'd find an adverb in the sentence. Pewa osu appears in the effect clause. So essentially, pewa kawi means right hand. Pewa osu means left hand. The idea is the right hand has more weight than the left hand. And so it's like right hand this, left hand that. Okay, you can also use kawosu, which is just a composite of the two in the effect clause without anything in the conditioning clause. This will probably make more sense with an example. Also, before we move on, the verb in the effect clause often has lassa interfixed before the verb root. Okay, this is just a convention. Lassa really means want to. It's also used in the future, conveying the future. It's really used here because of the hypothetical nature of the proposition in this kind of a sentence. So, example, okay? Now, this is a conditional, this is a subordinate clause relationships with condition being the relationship between the two clauses. Naya tawu yis, my goodness, I spelt that wrong in the first bit up the top. Should be tawu, not tawi, anyway. Naya tawu yis pewa kawi noyam niwa ele nalasa yus yis pewa osu. Okay, the first clause has the conditioning statement, pewa kawi, if, right hand. Naya tawu yis pewa kawi noyam niwa ele. Okay, if the deer drinks bad water, nalasa yus yis, it will be unwell. Nalasa yus yis. Okay, naya tawu yis pewa kawi noyam niwa ele nalasa yus yis pewa osu. Let's look at the same sentence here, but this time I've used the contracted composite version kawosu. When you're doing it this way, it only needs to appear in the effect clause, the second clause here. Naya tawu yis, I spelt it wrong again in the bit at the top, sorry, not in the interlinear gloss. Naya tawu yis noyim niwa ele na lasa yosis kawosu. Okay, it means the same thing. We're just using a variation, probably more common in colloquial speech in this dialect of Latropeth. Now let's look at clause relational adverbs expressing subordination where there is a time or a space relationship between the two clauses, a temporal or a spatial. Temporal means time, spatial means place. Okay, the man left after the food arrived. The man arrived when the food was ready. Ship, the man saw the squirrel beyond where the cat saw the mouse. Not entirely sure if linguistically this beyond where would be classified as a subordinating conjunction, but the concept is essentially the same. Okay, now let's look at Latropeth. Now I want you to remember these two new words. Baho, referring to time, boa, referring to place. These are very common words, and they appear in lots of expressions. To try and get at how we introduce the concept of subordination between clauses where the relationship is time or space. This is a little diagram that I hope will help, or a little schema. So we have the line here, X marks the spot, that's sort of now or here. You have baho time, boa place. If you move in this direction, it's after or ahead. If you move in this direction, it's before or back. And there's degrees in each direction, okay? Nahes, a little ahead, Bese, general, and barna, far ahead or far after. You've got mayu, a little, lekam, general, and yelna, far, in the other direction, back or before. And you mix and match these to produce your subordinating conjunction depending on the situation. Right, so let's, okay, so what I've done here is I've got bajo, which is time, and I've got yelna, which is a degree quite far behind, so long before. Let's look at the sentence. Pitenius nakumnia punim nasu, pitenius bajo yelna tuyi lua paladasu. Pitenius nakumnia punim nasu, pitenius bajo yelna tuyi lua paladasu. Okay, the man went to the river long before the woman went into the forest. Just for your reference, Nia Punim Nasu, Nia is like to, Punim is in front of, Nasu, the river. Just by convention, you generally say going to the front of the river. Lua Paladasu, Lua is usually, means in. It's usually used for, in this context, for when you're in a liquid like water, Niu. But in this case, you can use it for Paladasu, forest, place of trees. If you think of forest as a kind of medium that you're in or going into. And finally, let's look at a example with a spatial relationship. So I've got boa here, place, and I've got lekam. So it means before, but it's before in terms of place, not time. Pitenia yis nakum nia punim nasu, pitenia yis boa lekam toyi lua paladasu. Okay, now you can be judicious about your translation because what we want to emphasize here is that we're talking about before in terms of place rather than time. The man went to the river back from where the woman went into the forest. If you think of it on a map, the river is probably going to be located before where the forest is located. Thanks for watching.